I'm Grant Wood of Bureau Brewing, and this is the Brewer to Brewer podcast from All About Beer. My guest is Lee Lord of Narragansett Beer, and she is here for a conversation that goes beyond the brew house and into topics that matter to brewing professionals and curious beer drinkers. First, please visit allaboutbeer.com and follow on social media at All About Beer. To support journalism in the beer space, check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer. We'll get into the conversation in just a moment, but first, this message.
The Brewer to Brewer podcast is proudly sponsored by First Tea. They have hundreds of teas and botanicals to create unique beer flavor, and ginger stands out as one of the greats. Try ginger in warming winter stouts and in ales for ginger beer flavor. Ready to spice things up? Email info@firsttea.com. That's FIRSDTEA.com to learn more about using ginger and other botanicals from First Tea.
Hi, I'm Paul Mahoney from Launchpad Brewing in Aurora, Colorado. And the main reason for our relationship with Malteurop, besides the consistency of their product, is working with Dustin Kraft, our local Malteurop craft sales manager. Dustin has some extensive brewing experience from previous jobs and is excited about the products that they offer and are developing. We have two separate brew houses at Launchpad, a 5-barrel pilot system and a 20-barrel brew house, which allows us to test some of the experimental malt products occasionally, which really keeps the creativity flowing in the brew house. In addition, we have had great experiences with their customer success team. Try our GABF gold medal winning beer, silver medal worthy, an American Belgian style ale made with 100% Malteurop malt. Contact Malteurop today and visit malteuropmaltingco.com.
Today's episode is sponsored by Stomp Stickers. Stomp is a proud member of the Brewers Association that produces a wide variety of printed brewery products, such as beer labels, keg collars, coasters, beer boxes, and much more. Stomp's website features an easy-to-use digital design tool, low-quantity orders, fast turnaround times, and free domestic shipping. Visit stompstickers.com and use code BREWER for 15% off of your first order.
Okay, let's get into it. A bit about my guest today. Lee developed a love for beer after trying Barleywine to impress a guy she was on an ill-fated date with. From that sip on, her passion kept growing. It grew so much that in 2011, she walked into a small brew pub near her hometown suburb of Boston and asked if she could start helping out and learning the ropes. They handed her a mop. She worked her way up from the bottom. During the day, she worked in the brewery, absorbing every bit of knowledge she could. And in the evening, she worked at the bar in the brew pub and in a craft beer retail shop, gaining access to some of the best beers in the US and from around the world. From there, she accepted a job at Smutty Nose Brewing in New Hampshire and shifted gears from a small brew pub to a large production facility. In 2015, she was offered the amazing opportunity to work with her mentor, Will Myers at Cambridge Brewing Company. They were the ones who brewed that fateful barley wine that started it all. They were the first commercial brewery in the company to produce Belgian beer and one of the first to utilize a barrel cellar to age beer in wood. Her time there gave her a great appreciation for both traditional ales and lagers and to also the importance of experimentation and innovation. Lee joined Narragansett Beer in 2020 to take the helm of the Providence Brewery. Alongside Tony and Mark, she helped build the brewery from the ground up to what it is today. Together, the brew crew has made over 31 different styles of beer, brewed over 300 batches, and won 2 gold medals in competition. Lee has brewed collaborations both here in Providence, across the US, and in Europe. And when she's not on the brew deck, she spends her time as an international beer judge, speaking on educational brewer panels, reenacting the Revolutionary War, and playing polo. The horse kind, not the water kind. Welcome, Lee.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me here. Yeah, it's really cool. When I got asked to do this, and I kind of ran through my Rolodex head about people that I might want to chat with, you were definitely in the top 5, and I was like, And I looked back at some of the other podcasts, and I was like, there's a couple of women, but it would be cool to chat with you and find out what's going on. And so, my first question for you, what was the barley wine that kicked this whole thing off?
That was Blunderbuss. That was back in 2017. Before that, I can remember like drinking macro lagers at parties, whatever, and Magic Hat number nines. And it
Mm.
I didn't dislike beer, but it never really lit that spark. It wasn't until I tasted that deep malty complexity in that little sherry glass. It was like this whole other experience of beer. It was nutty, it was caramelly, it was dried stone fruity, and just all these levels. My head literally exploded. Like
Wow.
I can transport myself right back to that day.
That's really cool. Yeah. And so you took this experience, the good part of that date, and you you took that over to where? Where was this this little brew pub in your hometown or
That was
near?
a Watch City in Waltham, Mass, which was a little 14-barrel Peter Austin brew pub, direct fire. I worked with Kelly McKnight and Aaron Matichuk. And we were a scrappy crew. We learned so much just, kind of MacGyvering every brew together. That it was a great and oftentimes dangerous learning experience, but we're now all like trauma bonded because of it.
Yeah, yeah. Everybody's got their fingers and toes, right? You know?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. I mean, when I lived in Boston, or actually I lived in Wayland outside of Boston, kind of close to Waltham. I guess it was my closest brew pub at the time.
Oh, nice.
And so yeah, I've been in Watch City. Tasted Aaron's beers. Had mixed experiences, as it turns out. He loved a good cask beer, and sometimes he was swinging for the fence, and sometimes he connected, and sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, same can be said for myself as a brewer sometimes too. Um,
Yeah.
but the thing about Watch City was it was also like at different points in our run, and certainly Aaron's run, he was there a whole lot longer than I was. I was there for a few years. He was there for much longer than that.
Yeah.
But depending on cash flow of the brewery, it was like, are we making this recipe the way we intended, or are we using ingredients that fell off the truck today? So it was,
Mm.
when I say scrappy, I mean sometimes it was like really, really scrappy.
Are you like clandestinely borrowing bags of malt from other breweries, or that kind of scrappy, or?
I think for a time we were actually getting some of our malt from like Cisco Foods because all of the brewers supply warehouses we owed so much
Ah,
money that they wouldn't sell to us.
ah,
Yeah. Yeah, and it wasn't uncommon for me to get sent off with my little corny keg, and I've done this at other breweries as well, and I welcome people to come do it to me at mine, but my little sanitized corny keg, like begging for yeast, like, hey, do
yeah,
you have any Kolsch yeast today? Hey, do you have any lager yeast? Like,
yeah,
what's up?
yeah. And so in your little intro here, you talked. This was 2011, is that right? When
Yeah.
you got in there?
Yep.
That's so funny because yeah, I mean it's kind of being becoming lost in the fog of time, obviously. But when I had left Boston at the end of 2011 and came back down here to Texas and was building Revolver, um, I annoyed you on Facebook and was trying to get you to move to Texas.
I
Uh,
loved that. I loved that.
yeah, and so instead of coming down to work for Revolver, you went off somewhere else. So where did you go? This
I
is.
went from Watch City, I went up to Smutty Nose in New Hampshire for a little over a year. And
Mhm.
then back down to Cambridge Brewing Company to work alongside Will Myers.
Yeah. And so tell me about your time at Smutty Nose. What did you learn from your brief experience up there in the bigger brewery?
I learned sort of, being a pub brewer, especially a scrappy little cobble everything together with ingredients that fell off the Cisco truck and duct tape brewer at Watch City. Smutty Nose is a whole different animal. That was they're not, or they weren't at the time. I don't know about now, but they were not a 24/7 production facility. But it was 2 shifts a day. I mainly ran the centrifuge and did cellar stuff. occasionally I'd pop in and help with recipe development and stuff like that, but really not at all. I was a cellar monkey on this huge system, going up
Yeah.
in dry hopping 270 barrel tanks in a scissor lift. So that was just the scale of everything, and the fact that, quality and consistency they were important at Watch City, but they were paramount in a large production facility. So
Yeah.
really driving that home, and having these strict parameters to work in, and just seeing, I mean, I think that was year 2 of Toll Farm being open there. They had just opened their new location. So everything was like bright and shiny and new. And we had a QC lab, which I was like, what is that?
Yeah. Hmm.
And a marketing department and a sales department. It was just a whole other planet. And instead of a scrappy team of 3 of us trying not to fall into the sinkhole that opened in the fermentation cellar of Watch
Mhm.
City, it was dozens of us. There was, a packaging crew and a QC crew and a marketing crew and, a hot side crew and a cold side crew. So it was just all these moving gears and, kind of finding my place, but seeing all of the different places someone could be in this
Mhm.
beer industry it just completely opened my eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you find that experience intimidating, or did you find it more empowering?
Both. Absolutely both. One of the hardest things for me, honestly, when I first started there was just gaining the muscle memory. I went from 1.5 inch hoses to 2 inch hoses and just dragging them around and like getting the clamps and the gaskets on. It just retraining my body just for that like little increase in size of everything was just so hard for me to train myself so it came naturally again. It was like relearning how to walk almost, but in this
Hmm.
case it was cellar. um
Yeah.
yeah, and it taught me, especially in the beginning, and this was such a great lesson, but it was so humbling every single day just how much I didn't know,
Mhm.
because before that, I was essentially an apprentice at Watch City, and this was my first like big girl job, sort of. And you know, under Aaron and Kelly, I learned so much, but there were things I didn't even know I didn't know. So coming to Smutty Nose, it was like, what is a cell count? Like,
Yeah.
what is cavitation even? Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So, the first 2 months of my time in that big production facility were just, I carried around this notebook every day and would just take notes constantly. And, it was really just getting really real with myself. And figuring out just how much I didn't know that I didn't
Hmm.
know. And then, I still have this question today of like, there's still so much more that's,
Yeah. No, I know. I know.
like every time you level up, it's such a humbling and amazing, but very get real with yourself experience, I
Sure.
think. Yeah.
Sure. So you're coming out of the pub brewery, you're going into the large production facility. Um, did you have any books or materials like training materials or resources that helped you gain understanding or gain a little bit more knowledge? Can you point to anything there?
For sure. I mean, I think, and this is true today, especially after building a brewery for the first time during a global pandemic. But my greatest resource is my network.
Hmm.
Um, and I have Charlie Bamforth's book, which is amazing, but really making connections in the industry and like the phone a friend thing. Like there's this group chat network now and it's predominantly women, but women from so many different fields. Like we have Kelly Treader, the scientist wizard from New Belgium, and we have Natalie
Hmm.
Baldwin from Wayfinder, and we have Morag, who is a cellar wizard. Like any part of process you have a question about, she's got you. So, you know, through networking and Megan Parisi. Yeah. Through
Mhm.
networking, I have countless resources of industry professionals that if I'm stuck on something, I know who to reach out to, and they can be like, oh, here's this paper on this, or like, and certainly, and this is dangerous. The internet is so wonderful and so horrible at the same time. But the Brewers Association forums and the pro brewer forums and the Reddit R brewery forums are
Mhm.
a source of great information, also great misinformation. So being able to pick and choose through that, I've really honed those skills at this point.
Yeah.
Um, and I have the Kunze book, and when I open it, my brain just goes, oh, there's so much, but
There's so
that's
many
there.
words, so many
Yeah,
words in there, and
yeah.
some of them are German, and it's
It's
like,
very dry. Like I
oh,
come from an English and a theater and creative writing background, so I'm like, can we color this up a little bit?
no, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, you can kind of wander off into those books, and a lot of them, I think that it doesn't matter where they came from, Germany or from the U.S.
Yeah,
Uh, in many ways, like the Practical Brewer and stuff like that, that was written for first editions in the 50s and 60s. They're really targeted to large scale. I don't want to say industrial, but large scale brewing operations that use adjuncts and things like that. And
yeah,
so there's a lot about getting efficiencies and a lot about using 20,000 pounds of malt to brew something, right? So
right,
really large scale stuff. So it can
right.
be intimidating.
Yeah, well, so I have those, and then I have Megan Parisi at Sam Adams, my translator, who can talk to me about things like a human being.
She's great.
She's
She's
amazing.
she's just so great. Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, so there you are, you're at Smutty Nose. And then you got the really great opportunity to come back to Boston and work with Will.
Yeah, yeah. It was really great. It was also terrifying. Like,
How is that terrifying? He's the nicest guy in the
he's the
entire world.
nicest guy, but when you have someone on such a huge pedestal,
Mm.
every time I made the tiniest mistake in front of him, I would die 10,000 deaths. Like,
Yeah.
and like
Okay.
we spent 5 years together, and like it was amazing. But we got into it a few times. as
Really?
as human beings, not like horribly, but like, yeah, I'd screw up in front of him, or like,
Well, no, I can. I mean,
and
I can.
he'd
I can
in
see
his
that. I mean,
in his
he's
Will
a stickler.
voice, he'd be like, Lee Lord, you did this, and we're gonna have to talk. And I was like, oh God, I just want to crawl in a hole and die now. Shoot.
Okay, Dad. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah, no. He's gonna listen to this and be like, oh my God.
Well, I did. Okay, so in the interest of, transparency, I did ask him first. You were my second, but I did ask Will first. And he was like, "No, no, not quite ready for this."
Oh no.
Yeah, yeah. And so you were my close second, but
Okay,
I
I'll
really
take
kind of
that.
I really want to I kind of wanted to pick Will's brain on some stuff. And so I'll just have to pick your brain on some stuff, kind of by
Okay,
proxy.
I'm going to stop you for a second because my job at Cambridge Brewing Company was kind of weird. Like, it was sort of a bridge between being a pub brewer and being a production brewer, because I
Hmm.
didn't actually work at the 10 Barrel Brew Pub.
Yep.
At the time, Will had bought Sean Hill's 20 barrel brew house off of him and installed it in another brewery outside of Boston called Mystic.
Hmm.
Um, so we had the 20 barrel and then 5 conical unitanks essentially.
Hmm.
So I was like, I called it rebel base. Like, there were 3 pub brewers, and then I was off in this like windowless brewing warehouse with the shittiest drain on the face of the planet, in
Worse than Watch City? Come on.
worse than Watch City. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, yeah.
That's bad.
Watch City had trench drains. Yeah, no. I'll send you pictures. But yeah, so I was like off on my own doing production brewing, and we did barrel project stuff, but only the stuff that went into bottles, not the pub only stuff. That stayed in the barrel cellar in Cambridge. So I had sort of a weird job with Cambridge Brewing Company that nobody had ever had before and nobody will ever have again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
House. Yeah. Well, we can cry about that one later.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So you were sort of out at Rebel Base,
Yeah. Yeah.
making
Brewing
what? Yeah. What
brewing
were
a
you brewing?
lot of Flower Child, a lot of Flower Child, a lot of Remain in Light Pilsner, a lot of Gourd Reaper. We did runs of Heather Ale. We did runs of Amber, various seasonals, various, sour and barrel project stuff, but
Hmm.
predominantly Flower Child and Remain in Light,
Gotcha.
for draft
Yeah.
accounts. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you were working with Will, and again, this is my brain picking by proxy. When you were working with Will, and did you have any opportunity to chat with him about you know, brew construction?
Yeah.
How are you putting these recipes together? And was there sort of an overriding philosophy, or how did that go?
It's every time we had one of these discussions, and I got to do a pub brew like once or twice a year, which was always like, let me at it. And then I'd make like the
Mm.
weirdest thing known to man. Like I think once I made a gruet that was sort of a love poem to my now husband, and I made it with a lot of like witchy, like libido herbs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome.
But Will's philosophy, he always, there's very tight parameters, and you got to sort of conceptualize your brew in terms of SRM, in terms of IBU, in terms of, you know, everything that goes into making a brew. And then you have to sort of make it your own, really. So it's like we would do a lot of hop steeps of like, what is 5 minutes? What is 7 minutes? What is 9 minutes? And just the
Mhm.
the real nitty gritty. And then just being able to utilize his brain of like, he's been doing this so long and he's so good at it that he would taste something or listen to a concept of a brew and be like, what would really zhuzh this up if we added sub-threshold flavors of lavender or of gentian root or
Yeah,
sugi wood or whatever, it's just this vast library of flavor knowledge, really.
yeah.
And it's almost like mixing a perfume where you have your threshold flavors, but knowing what's really going to make those pop or what's really going to elevate the whole beer. That was something that I had never thought to think of before,
Hmm.
was,
Hmm.
just all those underlying layers going together to make something that truly shines. Not
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm making a West Coast IPA. I'm going to use sea hops. I'm going to use, you know, carapils, whatever. No, if you
Hmm.
sprinkle in a little honey malt or, you add just this amount of acidulated, like it'll really make everything pop. And so being able to tie that all together in such a beautiful way was one of the greatest lessons I've probably learned from him.
Hmm. Yeah, and so from that, did you come up with or decide on like particular set of flavors or a particular set of ingredients that you tend to gravitate toward, or do you still have just kind of whatever, more broad open kind of feelings about those things?
Kind of both, kind of both. I often joke that I have the palate of a 80-year-old British man. Like English malts are my love, and I think that's evident from what hooked me into beer in the first place was this like big Maris Ottery malt bomb. But I just love them so much, and there's so much complexity to them, and tasting the intricacy, especially in the lower ABV offerings, actually, of bitters and milds and things like that, is just where my heart is the happiest.
Yeah.
I tried not to get too stuck there because especially modern palettes are not always trending that way. So, you
Yeah.
know, I've also, and I have Chris Loring to thank for a lot of this at Notch, but the crisp delicacy and complexity of European lagers as well is something that I'm really, really cheating on English malt with. Yeah, like,
Yeah. No, I hear
um,
you. I hear you.
yeah, yeah. And then, you know, I love, again, I'm probably dating myself. I feel like such an old fuddy-duddy, but I love a good West Coast IPA. I love
Hmm.
the hops. Like, people make fun of me, but Simcoe is just so beautiful.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's cool.
yeah.
That's real cool. Yeah, I don't, I find it interesting that you're calling yourself an old fuddy-duddy, since I'm actually the old fuddy-duddy here. But I completely appreciate all those things you were saying about the more traditional styles, right? And so, but you mentioned earlier the Gruit, which is super duper traditional.
It's uber
Um,
traditional.
yeah, it's like before tradition was a thing. Um, and so coming out of all of that with your time at Cambridge, what do you think out of that period and with Will's mentorship, if you could kind of condense that down, and I know this is going to be hard, but into three or four like takeaway things that kind of prepped you for where you are now, what would you say?
I'm gonna borrow Will's slogan that he said to me many, many times over the years, which is "Don't fuck it up."
Mm, hmm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. David Grinnell at Boston Beer would often say, "Don't embarrass us."
Yeah,
As his parting thing as we're going off to do something, don't embarrass us. And we're like, okay.
yeah. I think one of the other big takeaways is, you know, even if you do fuck it up, and I'm not saying I ever did, I admit to nothing, but you know,
Not in public, no.
not in public.
Mm.
Um, but take pride in what you do. You know, take pride, take it seriously, but not too seriously. And really give it the respect it deserves, and then laugh
Hmm.
at it.
No, those are good. I mean, um, when I started at Boston Beer, one of the phrases was, you're in the beer business. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. And so I think that tracks. I completely agree.
Yeah, and with building out Narragansett, I had never run a brewery before. I had never built a brewery before. I went from creating probably 2 or 3 recipes a year to all of them.
Yeah.
And I was shitting my pants. I was absolutely terrified. And it took some former colleagues of mine from Cambridge Brewing Company to be like, it's beer. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you'll,
Chill.
you'll
Yeah.
be fine. You're
Yeah.
also not Hill Farmstead. You're Narragansett. So like,
Right.
which has been a really good lesson too, because the reason I was so psyched to work for Gansett is because I never saw somebody sort of sniffing Narragansett and being a douche about it. Like everybody with a Gansett in their hands was smiling and having fun, which
Hmm.
really I think is important to beer culture as a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's great.
You
Yeah.
know, and I joke with people sometimes, and my husband hates it when I say this, but like I turn people's money into urine. Like
I love that. All right. Okay. Say on that note, we're gonna have to take a little break, because believe it or not, we're almost midway through this thing, and so we're gonna break for a message, and we'll come right back for more conversation with Lee Lord.
Holiday times are the right time for a nice gingerbread stout. First Tea has ginger, the defining flavor of this zesty holiday classic. Combine ginger with cinnamon, vanilla, and other flavors to create your distinctive holiday beer. Email info@firsttee.com. That's FIRSDTEA.com to find out more.
Hi, I'm Paul Mahoney from Launchpad Brewing in Aurora, Colorado. And the main reason for our relationship with Malteurop, besides the consistency of their product, is working with Dustin Kraft, our local Malteurop craft sales manager. Dustin has some extensive brewing experience from previous jobs and is excited about the products that they offer and are developing. We have 2 separate brew houses at Launchpad, a 5-barrel pilot system and a 20-barrel brew house, which allows us to test some of the experimental malt products occasionally, which really keeps the creativity flowing in the brew house. In addition, we have had great experiences with their customer success team. Try our GABF gold medal winning beer, silver medal worthy, an American Belgian style ale made with 100% Malteurop malt. Contact Malteurop today and visit malteuropmaltingco.com.
This episode is also sponsored by Stomp Stickers, one of our favorite partners when it comes to printed brewery products. Stomp Stickers is a reliable resource for printed items such as beer labels and boxes, keg collars, coasters, and more. Visit stompstickers.com and use code BREWER for 15% off of your first order.
All right. Welcome back. So yeah, so you've made it through the first half of the show, and so now you've made it to the lightning round. So
Oh God.
I'm gonna ask you some very quick questions. So first thing, top of mind when I ask you these questions, okay?
It's gonna be like 100% fart jokes.
That's great.
All
Ready?
right, go. Yeah.
What's your favorite beer style?
Barleywine.
What's your favorite hop variety?
Hallertau Middlefro.
Ooh, that is not what I was expecting, but okay. Okay. And then what's your quest?
I seek the grail.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect, perfect. And so, as it turns out, your grail, it seems to be, has been located somewhere in Rhode Island. And so, right, you left Cambridge and you went off to become the brewmaster at Narragansett. So, tell us a little bit about that journey south that took you to Narragansett.
Well, the journey south starts with my now husband. So I had been living in Providence for some time and commuting up to Cambridge. So finding a job that was 9 minutes away from my house instead of 69 minutes away from my house was pretty favorable. But also, it came at can you hear me? Sorry.
Yep, you just came back. Sorry.
Okay.
I was dead for a minute.
Oh, was I? Should I start again?
Yeah, if you can.
Okay.
Why don't you go? You were living in Providence.
Yeah, I was living in Providence, and commuting to Cambridge for my job. But it was sort of an intersection of fate because Mystic Brewing, the brewery that I was working out of for Cambridge, closed. They went out of business. So I suddenly was sort of orphaned. I started working at the pub in Cambridge, but they already had a full team there. So like finding a space for me was really weird. And so in the end days of Mystic, when I was sort of packing everything up, getting the tanks ready to ship back to Shawn Hill in Vermont, I got a call one day from Mark Hellendrung, the president of Gansett. And for those of you who have met him, you know what I'm talking about. For those who haven't, I describe him as such. It's like he's like a brilliant version of the Will Ferrell Harry Carey character on SNL. Like, hey Norm, like, hey, I got a great idea. Like, whoa. So I get a call from this guy who I'd never met or talked to before. He was like, hey, you want to come run my brewery in Providence? We haven't built it yet. Here's the timeline. I was like, let me sit down on this keg and hyperventilate with my head between my knees for a second, and then I have some questions for you. And that's how it started. It started A, because I lived in Providence, and B, because I'm absolutely obsessed with sharks and love the movie Jaws. So it was like, hey, I hear you're the Rhode Island brewer that loves Jaws. And I was like, indeed.
Yeah.
You want me to what? Okay.
That's very, very cool.
Yeah, it was awesome.
To get that call, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so I immediately said yes. And then I was like, what have I just oh no.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a big
Yeah.
hump to bite off, right?
Uh,
So tell me about that, right? So I guess you said yes
I
to the
said
brewery.
yes. That was in 2019. And then I officially left my job at Cambridge in January of 2020. Um, and was sort of floating around pouring beer, getting bartender jobs. And then the pandemic hit and the entire world closed down.
Yeah.
And then that May, Narragansett decided to take our relationship to the next level and make it official. And at that point, we were working with John Carpenter as a consultant. And he was the one that sourced our brew house, all our tanks. The building was under construction. Um, and I was literally the only employee in the
Yeah.
building. Yeah. Trying to learn how to pipe my own glycol and everything really,
Yeah.
because before that, Spuddy Nose was pretty new, but other than that, I had worked in with very, very old equipment and sort
Yeah.
of very
So so now you've got this brand new brewery that they've put
yeah,
into a building.
yep.
And tell me about the brew kit that you have now. What's the equipment like?
It is a 20 barrel, 3 vessel craft kettle system, semi-automated. So we have mash tun, louder tun, kettle whirl. Um, and we have let's see, 13 30 barrel conicals, a few 20 barrels, and then a 40 and a 20 lagering tank, two 40s and a 20 lagering tank, and a couple brights. We unitank most of our stuff. The brew house is wonderful. Craft Kettle is a company out of Louisiana.
Hmm.
And they have been just absolutely fabulous to work with. We the first 2 weeks of brewing, my colleague Tony Barber and I stuck every single mash that we started.
Ooh,
And the
okay.
craft kettle consultant who came out to train us on the brew house was an absolute godsend because we were absolutely shitting our pants. And I think that's like the fifth time I've used that phrase during
Yeah.
this interview, but we were absolutely beside ourselves. Like, what is going on? How do
Yeah.
I work this? Neither of us have ever built a brewery before. And Jeremy King, who now runs a brewery in Minnesota, trained us on the brew house, and he is just an equipment whisperer. The man is such a genius, and I can't thank him enough for keeping me alive for those
Mm.
like first 2 weeks of production because he listened to the louder ton and he was like, oh, there was a tear. The gasket was about the size of my pinky finger. There was a
Hmm.
tear in a gasket in one of the manometers of our louder ton that was allowing bubbles up under the mash bed.
Huh.
And that's why we had 20-hour days for the first 2 weeks of
Interesting.
brewing. Yeah.
So he could hear that
He
little
could hear it,
slurping
but
noise.
without him, it would have just been like, well, that's my life now, I guess. Like,
Oh, no, no, no,
no,
no.
yeah,
And so when obviously you've got, well, maybe not obviously to everybody, but you know, Narragansett is sort of a legacy brand, right? It's been around for many, many years.
yeah, since
And
1890.
yeah. And so when you're thinking about you know, since you're the brewmaster and you're working with this sort of legacy brand, does that color any of your decisions about beers that you're making, or are you just like, we're new, we're gonna kind of rip that old, you know, scab off or whatever it is, and we're gonna go.
No, I'm a history nerd. So I take great reverence in the legacy of the brand, and one of the cool things, and I don't know if everyone's familiar with this, but all of the Narragansett lager, our standard American lager, and all of the Del Shandy, that's all brewed at Genesee
Hmm.
up in Rochester, New York. And my facility is essentially a 20 barrel R&D facility.
Yeah,
In which we are not licensed to sell our flagship products. Our licensing stipulates that we can only sell what's produced in house.
right.
So our workaround to that, because obviously, you know, we don't have a pasteurizer or a filter or a cereal cooker.
Hmm.
And our way around that is really diving into the history of the brand, which is something I've had so much fun with. Like we have a 1953 throwback Gansett lager, and then the next one we're coming out with in our series is coming out next month, and that's a 1960s American lager. And so it's been so fun and interesting to research, you know, sort of
Hmm.
IBU trends and adjunct trends from post-war America through to now, because we find that directly post World War II, IBUs in American lagers were at their highest, and then they sort of bottomed out around 1991. So being
Yep.
able to recreate these beers at different points of that arc,
Hmm.
and, you know, seeing the predominance of, you know, say cluster hops or rice, excuse me, used as an adjunct as opposed to corn and things like that.
Yeah.
And ABVs and stuff like that. You know, I think I'll probably draw the line when things really started turning into piss water in the 70s, but like maybe not. Maybe we'll make some.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I mean, I'm old enough to have talked with guys that came, out of basically out of World War II and were creating beers or basically continuing beers in the way they were making decisions at the time, and and using corn grits, for example. When I started back in the 80s, Pearl Brewery was using both corn grits and corn syrup at the time. And when people think about corn syrup now, they think of high fructose corn syrup. But this
All
was
I can think of
actually,
is Schlitz and how they like killed themselves with it.
yeah, yeah. And so, but
Like,
this was brewer syrup. So this was specifically digested to be a high maltose um, syrup, but derived from corn.
yeah. Oh, I kind of want to play with that now.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if anybody even makes it anymore. I mean, I think I'm
Oh,
I'm I'm sure somebody does, but
I'm gonna
you
find it and we're gonna do a collab grant.
so we have to go find cluster hops and stuff like that,
Oh,
I
I have
guess.
some.
That was an
Um,
old that was an old dream from those of us down at Boston Beer Company one time. We were going to go try to find cluster hops grown on every continent, and then call it clusterfuck.
yes,
Um, yeah, maybe we should resurrect that project.
sure.
Well, so I have a little tiny Narragansett, my own personal Narragansett connection, which actually goes back to the 80s. And so when I got into the brewing industry and went to work for Pearl, there was a guy named Bob Skinkle who was working for Pearl at the time, who I believe was the last brewmaster out the door at the original Narragansett facility.
You worked with him?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
All right.
So I took when I got hired at Pearl, he was winding down and I was going to replace him as a brewing supervisor at Pearl when he was retiring. And so he kind of showed me the ropes there at Pearl after I think he had gone from Narragansett, Rhode Island. I think he'd gone to Fort Wayne, Indiana for the Falstaff plant there for a little while. And then he came down to Pearl because we were in the whole Pabst Falstaff thing at the time, S&P. And so, yeah, I met him many, many years ago and worked with him.
That's so cool. What was he like?
He was a little, he was a little tiny. I mean, he's kind of, if you think of him as what kind of classic look of a brewmaster, he had that. He was this kind of pudgy little guy. I think he was shorter than me, and I'm not that tall. Um, but he was kind of a no-nonsense New Englander, and he was ready. He was like, I'm going back to Rhode Island. I'm not going to live in San Antonio. And I think he went back. He went back to Providence and was living there. And I think trying to, at that time, back in the late 80s and early 90s, was trying to resurrect that whole building as sort of brewing education center. Unfortunately, he never you
Oh
never got
man,
to
that would have been
realize that.
awesome.
Yeah, yeah. But
So
no, he was a nice guy,
did
and
he impart you, to borrow Will Meyer's term, did he impart you with any pearls of wisdom that you can pass along?
oh God, I wish I again, this is oh God, 1985. So the
Okay.
very beginning of my brewing career. And so I don't remember any specifically from Bob.
Okay.
But what I do remember about that period, and in particular, it was Bill Jones was the assistant brewmaster there from Jones Brewing Company up in Pennsylvania. He had come down there. Bob Skinkle was there. And I do remember one of the very first lessons that I ever got walking through a brewery was about listen to your brewery. When you're walking through and things are running normally, you learn to know what normal sounds like.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
and often the first inkling that you have that something is going wrong is that it doesn't sound right.
Yep. Yep. After working in a facility with almost zero drains, I can hear liquid hit the floor from like I can be on the phone with somebody and hear it and be like, something just spilled in your house. And they're like, what the hell? Because
What?
that sound to me is like 3 hours of shop vacuuming.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's sort
Wow.
of a mind fuck now though, because I hope one day you'll see it and I can show you around, Grant. John, you've seen it. But my brew house is in the tap room.
Mm,
So during operating hours, it is noisy AF.
wow.
Yeah, yeah, which
Well,
has reconditioned my listening.
oh
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because, well, if there's people in there, then you want to obviously be hypersensitive to that,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. Which is
So
also, that's something also specific to the Cambridge Brewing Company pub. Like their 10-barrel brew house is like in the middle of the restaurant.
yeah, 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 yeah. And I was just again, we kind of crossed paths. I
I
was
know. I
there.
was there like 3 hours after you.
Yeah, yeah, because I wanted to get up there and have a beer with Will before Cambridge closes down at the end of the year. And so, for those of you who are listening to this podcast and didn't know that, and hopefully it's not a shock to you, if you have the wherewithal, get to Cambridge and go have a beer with Will before the end of the year and celebrate their really lovely and successful run and all the fantastic beers that they made. I would highly recommend that. So, I don't know. Oh, we might have locked up again. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You're not moving on screen, but that doesn't matter. Oh, you're
You're
back.
back,
All
and
right.
you're back. And so now, right, as of the end of 2024, things are chugging along. I'm assuming at Narragansett, and but what I'd like to ask you about now is, um, there's been a lot of talk in the brewing industry, particularly craft brewing industry, changes in the business cycle, and craft doesn't have the shiny cachet that it used to have, I guess. Um, what do you see next, Lee? What do you see in craft brewing moving forward, and maybe broadly, but more specifically for Narragansett?
I think, sort of in broad terms, I think, and you ask any brewer and they can pontificate for hours about what happened and what's going to save craft and whatever. But like, my overall message is like, I think craft beer in this country just kind of started to like the smell of its own farts a little too much. It got like,
Yeah, a little navel
like,
gazing. Yeah.
yeah, a little bit, and so I think, um, I think keeping a keen eye on consumer trends, and I think we can get clues from not just the food and beverage industry, but from media as well. Like I see a lot of parallels with music and mainstream
Hmm.
popular culture as a whole, and sort of where society is gravitating towards, and even how people are gathering now. Like we're seeing changes in all of this. And I think keeping a keen eye on that is important. But, I think the most important thing for craft beer, and this is one of my immediate goals for 2025 going forward, is to keep beer fun. Keep an eye on quality, you know, and kind of keep it simple, stupid. Like I think that in this huge, and I'm going to use the term, in this huge hop chowder pastry stout landscape that we've kind of created and then burned people out on, I think bringing things back to just drinkability and, sort of reminding ourselves as brewers and the consumer just what beer is, because it's such an ancient thing, and it's been around since the dawn of civilization, and it's always been a way for, yes, people to hydrate and have some fun, but for people to gather. Like the American Revolution was thought up in pubs. It's just such a huge history of humanity and gathering and togetherness with beer, that sort of keeping that in mind, and not trying to force it on the consumer, but like not forgetting that as brewers, and really just making something that people can have a good time with, and also in today's landscape, keeping your price in check.
Fair. Yeah.
In this
Yeah,
time
very
of
fair.
inflation and sort of uncertainty, maybe taking a look at your recipes and finding ways to,
Mhm.
make beer more accessible cost wise, because that's, unfortunately a thing in this country. Probably we're seeing that now greater than we've seen it since the 70s, possibly, with inflation and everything. So yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and kind of back to your navel gazing with craft, right? It's like, um, I think there was some price inflation there, right? People that are pricing their beers at a high level. I know they want to make money and you got to make your margin. I get that.
Yeah.
But it also gets a little too precious sometimes, right? And you're I think there was a period, maybe it was 5, 6 years ago when it was almost like, Pokemon or something. You
Oh
got to drink them
yeah.
all, right?
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna get on Untapped, and I've got to get this whole extensive range, and whether
Right.
it was,
And the armchair beer judge
yeah,
mentality. But and I think that this all comes from, for a while, and I don't think the beer industry was wrong to try this angle. I just think it got away from us a little bit, but we were trying to elevate ourselves to the point of wine with
mm,
these beer dinners and, the pairings and the sniffing and the, trying to elevate beer to this bougie thing.
yeah,
I think we were a little too good at that. Maybe. So now we got to bring it back the other way.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
we
make it. Hmm,
I'm brewing a
go
malt liquor in a couple months, and I'm so psyched
on.
about it.
Well, looking back at some of that history that you were talking about, if you look at like the Ballantine ale, right?
Yeah.
Which the sort of more recent incarnations have been in that range, right? The kind of, was it 9 to 11 ABV, and looking back at sort of those original, you want to think of it, it's sort of the American version of barley wine, with other things. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, yeah. Um, I think of beer as the beverage of friendship. And, it's let's go have a beer. Let's go, not necessarily let's go have a glass of Cabernet or something.
Right. Well, and there's something very working class about, you have Saison and you have Grisette, and Porter, and those are literally named for the workers that drank
Yeah,
them,
yeah.
and there's something very accessible about beer.
Mhm.
It's an every man's drink. But I think that that message has sort of been, I wouldn't say lost, but I think bringing the focus back to that
Mhm.
will not hurt our cause.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's
Yeah.
fair. And so, what have you got in the tanks right now? What should people come and drink in the next before Christmas?
Oh, we have our Bohemian Pilsner. I'm brewing our porter, which we do
Mhm.
seasonally tomorrow. And that
Nice.
one is really, really cool because Narragansett's been making a porter since forever.
Yeah.
But when I started brewing porters in this facility, so this recipe, it's a Ron Pattinson 1822 London porter recipe.
Mhm.
Um, this one's not sour because while I like giving nods to the past, I also like drinkability.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it's not Brit positive. But our Rhode Island Historical Society porter that we did for them was so good and sold so well that that has now become our house porter,
Very
which is
cool.
it's so cool. It's doing these historical recipes is always such a trust fall. It's like,
Hmm.
wait, I am only using base malt, brown malt, and amber malt, and in these percentages, like I don't know if this is gonna come out drinkable at all.
Yeah.
And it's always such a trust fall, and they always surprise me in the best ways. So yeah.
Yeah. So you got some Bohemian pills, you got some porter.
Yep.
You doing anything like true kind of Christmassy thing, or is it you keeping it
Yeah.
traditional?
We have an English style winter warmer. It's called Bing Crosby's White Christmas, even though it is a brown as hell beer. So that's a traditional English winter warmer, sort of notes of figgy pudding. We added some sweet cherry and some sweet orange peel to that, just to give it a little fruitcake vibe,
Nice.
because
Okay.
nobody ever makes fun of fruitcakes. No, it's delicious. That
Does
that's
that, but it doesn't actually contain fruitcake though,
It
right?
does not. It does
Oh,
not. No.
oh well. That's next year.
No. No.
So, let's see. We've got just a few more minutes, and I didn't want to state the obvious, but you are a woman,
Yeah.
and you are in the brewing industry.
Yeah.
And until recently, that was a challenge. I mean, as a woman in a what would have been considered a male-dominated field, um, do you feel better about that? You were mentioning that you had like this whole network of women that you work
Yeah.
with and ask questions of.
It's amazing. And I've always like my beacon has always been Tanya Cornett. Like she's always
Hmm.
been out there like inspiring. I think that's kind of a tricky question because now gender is such a spectrum. Whereas like when I started in the beer industry, it was very like one or the other. And
Yeah.
now I'd sort of like to see this industry shift focus to not that. um,
No,
you know,
that's
there
fair.
there are folks in other places on that gender spectrum who are now fighting the fight that I think that women
Hmm.
started with, and it's like let's open up the discussion to, you know, not one or the other.
Yeah. Well, I guess the reason why I kind of preambled that question is, what would your advice, if you have any,
Yeah.
be to a young person coming into this industry? Um, what, I mean, would you have any general or even some specific advice?
Oh yeah. My biggest piece of advice and the reason I'm still here today is just outlast the bastards. Like you're gonna have days that make you want to throw in the towel and kill yourself. Like, holy shit. It's not easy all the
Yeah.
time. Just have hope that tomorrow's gonna be better and outlast. Just stick around. But
Yeah.
within boundaries.
Yeah, I would hope that you would if you found a boss or a supervisor, somebody that wasn't supportive, that you would find a way to abandon that position and find somebody who is.
Yeah.
And and then that's tricky. I mean, that sort of is simplistic, and I really didn't mean it in that way. But I think you can figure out sometimes by talking to the people that work for a specific brewery, kind of walking in and who's working there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to give it just a little brief shout out to Prost. Because I walked into Prost because we're brewing with them, and I looked around and over half the people on the floor were women, and most of them in the brew house. And
Yeah.
so I was like, cool, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
And very supportive. And so no, I was just curious if yeah, well, and I get it, just
Outlast the bastards,
outlast them.
and also talk to people in your industry, especially about salary. It drives
Yeah.
me ape shit that the Brewers Association does not require salary parameters on their job postings. Like,
Hmm.
talk about it.
Yeah, talk
Make it
about it.
weird.
Talk
Find out what
about
other people in your position are making.
it. Well, did you have anything else maybe that you wanted to share with us? Because like I said, we're ticking up on the time here. So I just wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to tell somebody something and or plug something that you've got coming. And I tried to talk
I'm gonna
about
show
beer.
you
So
guys, listeners, you can't hear it, but I'm wearing my Barleywine is Life shirt. And I just want to give a big shout out to Alex Kidd and him and his family some love.
very good.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, Lee, it's been great. And I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to chat with us. And so just want to remind Lee that since she decided to join me in this conversation, that she will be in this chair next time. So she'll be back on the next episode of the show as the host, having a conversation with a brewer of her choosing, and that will be on the air in 2 weeks. So make sure that you tune in for that. A reminder, visit allaboutbeer.com and follow us on social media. To support journalism in the beer space, check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer. I am Grant Wood. That is Lee Lord. Thank you for listening to Brewer on Brewer Podcast.
First Tea is your source for ginger and a whole host of teas for brewing. Find your winter flavors and aromas to spice up the holiday season by talking with the team at First Tea. Email them at info@firsttea.com. That's FIRSDTEA.com to find out more.
Hi, I'm Paul Mahoney from Launchpad Brewing in Aurora, Colorado. And the main reason for our relationship with Malt Europe, besides the consistency of their product, is working with Dustin Kraft, our local Malt Europe craft sales manager. Dustin has some extensive brewing experience from previous jobs and is excited about the products that they offer and are developing. We have 2 separate brew houses at Launchpad, a 5-barrel pilot system and a 20-barrel brew house, which allows us to test some of the experimental malt products occasionally, which really keeps the creativity flowing in the brew house. In addition, we have had great experiences with their customer success team. Try our GABF gold medal winning beer, silver medal worthy, an American Belgian style ale made with 100% Malt Europe malt. Contact Malt Europe today and visit malteuropemaltingco.com.
Today's episode was also sponsored by our friends at Stomp Stickers. Stomp is a proud member of the Brewers Association that produces a wide variety of printed brewery products, such as beer labels, keg collars, coasters, beer boxes, and much more. Stomp's website features an easy-to-use design tool, low quantity orders, fast turnaround times, and free domestic shipping. Visit stompstickers.com and use code BREWER for 15% off of your first order.